Hello, friends. Day 30, 75 refined. We have 45 days left. You think you make it? How you doing? Doing good? All right, let's take a look at the quote of the day. Comes from Nelson Mandela. It always seems impossible until it's done. It's a great quote, especially considering we only have 45 days left. Did you think that in 30 days you'd have gone through, 13, starting on your 14th book of the Bible? We're chugging along. We are chugging along. So that's day 30, 75 refined. Let's get into today's reading. All right, so we finished up First Chronicles, chapters 27 through 29, and then we got into Second Chronicles, chapters 1 through 12. And so we're closing on the life of David, and we're getting into the reign of Solomon here. And then this follows the height of Israel's kingdom, and it starts to show the first cracks that will eventually cause its split. So as we wrap up, so David finishes preparing the kingdom. David organizes the leadership of Israel before his death. You're going to see a lot of repetitive things like we did yesterday. Again, Chronicles, you see a lot of repeating things as you do with Samuel and Kings, but I will point out some of the key differences. But again, so David, what does he do? He structures the kingdom, military divisions, tribal leaders, royal officials, priestly duties, treasury administrators. So he's not just a warrior king. He is actually preparing the nation to function while he's gone. So he wants to make sure that he's leaving a lasting legacy, something that is solid with systems in place. Then he prepares the temple. He gathers all the leaders of Israel, and he explains that God chose Solomon to be the one to build the temple, not him. He says in 1 Chronicles 28:5, says, "My son Solomon," and then he goes on to say, "is the one that God has chosen to build the temple." Even though David cannot build it, he wants to make sure that he can fund it and provide everything that it needs. So he puts together the temple plans, the materials, the gold and the silver, organization of the priests and the Levites. He even gives from his own personal treasury. Like he is trying to fund this thing. And so this is one of the themes here of just joyful generosity. What's the old adage? It's about, and I think I tried to quote this before, and I totally botched it. I'm going to botch it again, but it's about planting a tree. Planting a tree, enjoying. Let me say that one more time. Planting a tree that the shade in which you'll never enjoy, or something like that. It's basically what Solomon's doing. One of these days I'll actually figure out that quote and I'll share it. but um, but we see in First Chronicles 29:3, excuse me, where David says, "I give my personal treasure of gold and silver." Well, the leaders follow his example, and again, in more joyful generosity. And it says in 1 Chronicles 29:14, "Everything comes from you, and we have given you only what comes from your own hand." This is them giving back to God because they recognize that it's not theirs, right? And then David dies, and then it says here in 29:28, the First Chronicles, he died at a good old age, full of days, riches, and honor. You know what it doesn't do? It doesn't talk about Bathsheba, Uriah, Absalom's rebellion, and any of his other failings. It's a highlight reel. That's what we're looking at, is the highlight reel. But those are all, as we know, they're all in the books of Samuel. It focuses on the king who prepared the temple. Because remember, this is post-exilic. They are rebuilding the temple. As a matter of fact, we're going to get into Ezra and Nehemiah. These are guys who leave the Babylonian exile in order to build the city and the temple and the wall. So we'll get into that very, very soon. And so then we get into Second Chronicles. Now we're stepping into Solomon. Solomon asks for wisdom. We remember this story from before, except in this version, depending on the translation you're looking at, Chronicles is the one that specifically mentions the word wisdom, whereas Kings it doesn't. So, but that's neither here nor there. Let's see. Give me wisdom and knowledge that I may lead this people. And then because Solomon asked for wisdom rather than wealth and power, God gave him all three. and as well as long life without trouble from his enemies. And then we see Solomon building the temple. When the ark is brought into the temple, something absolutely incredible happens. We see the glory of the Lord fill the temple in 2 Chronicles 5:14. The priests cannot even stand to minister. They are just falling out under the immense presence of God. If you've ever seen where somebody has their hands laid upon them and they fall out under the Spirit, listen, I'm going to be totally honest with you. Sometimes it's fake. You may have been one of those people who have fallen over fake. We've all done it. Well, maybe we haven't all done it. I know I've done it. But there have been actual instances, man, where I literally fall out under the presence of God. And I will say that has been fewer and far between than me faking it. Back in one of our old churches, the pastors, they lay your hands and they almost kind of push you over. It was kind of like the obligatory fall down. But no, and we even see this with Jesus when they come to arrest him, and he says, "I am," and then they all fall over, all the guards. But I digress. But we see here they can't even stand to minister. God's presence fills the building. And then 2 Chronicles 6 and 7, chapter 6 and 7, Solomon prays that God would hear the prayers of his people when they turn toward the temple. Then God responds with a promise that many believers still quote today. If my people who bear my name humble themselves, I will hear them from heaven. It's a great promise. This promise was originally given under the covenant of Israel, but the principle still applies today. All right, and then we get into the height of Solomon's kingdom. It reaches extraordinary wealth and influence. When I say height, I don't mean like the physical height, but height. Anyways, it's late. I'm tired. It's already 10:30. We had a long day today. The Queen of Sheba, we remember her from before. She comes to visit, and she's just amazed by his wisdom and his wealth. And she said the reports she heard was true. But then again, we know the story of Solomon. There are warning signs that start to accumulate. He has the wealth, he has the horses, and he has the wives. And it's very specific in Deuteronomy 17. It warns kings not to have too many wives, especially from outside sources. But yeah, it's a problem for Solomon. It's a problem for his dad too, if you remember that. The kingdom splits. So after Solomon dies, his son Rehoboam becomes king. The people ask him to lighten the burden that Solomon placed on them. Instead of listening to the elders, he listens to the young advisors. There is great wisdom in seasoned men and women of God. There are a lot of young believers that get onto TikTok, they get onto YouTube and Facebook and Instagram and Snapchat and MyFace and Your Space and all the other different whatever. These young believers that God bless their cotton socks, they mean well, but they're not mature. They're not mature enough, and they fancy themselves teachers. But they're held to a higher standard. Teachers are held to a higher standard. And so these young men and women of God come to step in, and they try to be, the top rooster, and doesn't always turn out well. They lead people astray. Anyways, so in this instance, what happens is the young advisors say, hey, tell them that they're going to, he says here, my father disciplined you with whips, but I will discipline you with barbed whips. Because they were like, oh, you think it's bad with Solomon. You have no idea. Whereas the older, wiser men were like, maybe be a wise king instead of ruling with an iron fist. And so 10 tribes end up breaking away. Israel becomes 2 kingdoms, Israel to the north and Judah to the south. We remember this story from before. Rehoboam turns from the Lord, and he abandons the law of the Lord. And then eventually Egypt's king invades Jerusalem, plunders the temple. And then when the leaders humble themselves, what happens? God shows mercy. And it even says in 2 Chronicles 12:7, they have humbled themselves, I will not destroy them. So here's some of the differences between Chronicles and Kings. So as we read in these sections, you'll notice there's sometimes things that are recorded differently. It's not a mistake. Okay? So get that out of your mind. These are not contradictions. These are oftentimes intentional. So let's take a look. Once again, Samuel and Kings, they focus on what? They focus on the political, mostly. There's some spiritual, but they focus mostly on the political. Whereas Chronicles focuses on temple worship and covenant identity. This is why they emphasize the priests and the Levites, temple organization, worship structure, and David's role in preparing the temple. It has a much larger section of the book. But here's some of the seeming contradictions and how we kind of reconcile these. First of all, and we talked about this yesterday, David's census, and as a matter of fact, we talked about this with some young men in our Bible study tonight. Samuel says that God allowed the census. Chronicles says that Satan incited David, and both things can be true at the same time. God allowed this to happen as a test, and also show His glory, to ultimately show His mercy. But God does allow these things to happen. He allowed it as judgment, but Satan was the immediate tempter. And we see the same pattern in Job. We'll get into that book coming up soon as well. Numbers in the census. Samuel and Chronicles record slightly different totals of Israel's armies. They probably reflect different counting methods, such as standing armies versus reserve troops and tribal forces. And ancient military records, especially in the ancient Near East, have different categorization for some of these things. We're wrapping it up. The purchase price. So Samuel records David paying 50 shekels of silver, whereas Chronicles says 600 shekels of gold. That's widely different amounts of money. Here's the reason. David bought just the threshing floor itself in that first instance, but then Chronicles records what the cost was probably later to purchase the entire Temple Mount. So that's typically where that comes in. So what are our threads with the coming Messiah? One, David prepares the kingdom, Solomon builds the temple, but neither are the final fulfillment, because later Jesus says something greater than the temple is here, Matthew 12:6. What is greater than the temple? The one that is in the temple, one that is glory resides in the temple, that is God, that is the Messiah coming, greater than the temple. The temple was where God's presence dwelt, but in Christ, God comes out and dwells with His people. So that's what we have today, friends. We're a little over 13 minutes. Not too bad of recording. Sorry, I rambled a little bit here and there. Again, little tired today, but yeah, we were chugging along. Day 30. We've got day 31 tomorrow, and just as a kind of a preview, I like to do this sometimes. So day 31 tomorrow, we have 2 Chronicles 13:28, and then the next day we wrap up the last few chapters of Chronicles, and then we get into the book of Ezra. Chugging along. So once again, like, comment, subscribe, do all the things, ring the bell. I love you guys, praying for you guys. I'm just praying that you get so much out of this. And yeah, Chronicles can seem a little repetitive, but there's still something to glean from it, as I hope that you were able to see as we went through the reading. But we will get into it again tomorrow, day 31. We have 45 days left. We're getting through this whole thing. It's going to be awesome. I'm excited to see what I end up doing once we get into the New Testament, because there's so much that happens, and we're going to be covering multiple books. Even later, as we cover some of the prophets, it's going to be it's going to be a lot. So let's keep digging in. I love you and praying for you, and we will see you tomorrow.